never forget what we fought for 100 years with blood, sweat, broken bones, death, and tears.
Hey, this is Steve Zeltzer with WorkWeek, and WorkWeek has covered over many years the situation of health and safety, the radioactive waste dump at Hunters Point Shipyard and also Treasure Island. And one of the foremost authorities on the struggle for health and safety and the protection of the health of community and workers is Dr. Ahimsa Sumchai. And she's a doctor. Her father was a longshore worker, and she's been engaged in a very important historic struggle to get the truth out about the dangers of that toxic dump site and what it means for working people. And she's joining us today on WorkWeek to talk about the history and also her struggle today to get accountability by government officials who should be doing their job in protecting the community and workers. So welcome to WorkWeek.
Thank you. It's always great to be here. It's such an important area right now. It's hopeful that we will have on the horizon at a federal level a presidential administration that, out of empathy will be more respondent to the needs of workers. So I expect that to be an area that is going to open up in the coming months.
And you've been fighting for the city Department of Public Health to do proper oversight. I know we've had many programs before about the role of Amy Brownell, who was an environmental engineer, apparently still with the city and county of San Francisco, who was actually being paid for by Lennar and was telling possible condo purchasers at Hunters Point that they should buy condos. She was actually helping to sell condos as part of her job as an environmental engineer.
Right.
I mean, how do you figure that,
Well, it is hard to explain, except that when the first parcel of the shipyard was transferred, parcel A, in December of 2004, I attended and spoke at the Health Commission hearing in which an important health ordinance, Article 31 of the Health Code, was passed. And at that time, it allowed for the developer, the master developer, Lennar, to compensate the health department for administrative oversight in earth-moving, quote-unquote, earth-moving activities at the federal Superfund site. So when it's viewed in the context of understanding that the San Francisco Department of Public Health enjoys a revenue stream every time there is toxic dirt moved at the federal Superfund system at the shipyard, then it becomes more clear. What you and I have touched upon privately is the resilience of Amy Brownell over the years. In 2009, the Hunters Point Shipyard Restoration Advisory Board was dissolved by the Navy BRAC team, despite the opposition of the Environmental Protection Agency. And in the letter that the Navy generated supporting its decision to dissolve the elected Restoration Advisory Board, they identified that the RAB's unanimous vote that was taken in January of 2009 calling for Brownell to be unseated as the DPH regulator and representative of the city and county of San Francisco. They cited that. The reason why the Restoration Advisory Board voted her off as a regulator, and again, this was unheard of. It was the first time the RAB had ever taken a stance to unseat a regulator, was because of emails that had surfaced that documented correspondence between Brownell, Mark Ruperta, the EPA's remedial advisor at the shipyard and a high-level Lennar executive. And in those email exchanges, they talked about ways to minimize the exposures to toxic dust that were continuing. And they also collaborated to successfully shut down a community air monitor, HV11, that was detecting astronomical exceedances in asbestos every day. And that air monitor was at the junction between the Lennar construction site and the Navy's remediation sites. And because the Navy and Lennar were arguing about who was responsible for these enormous exceedances, these were exceedances in the 60,000 fiber per cubic centimeter range. Shutdown range is 20,000. And so they couldn't resolve the issue of who was responsible. So they took the logical step of just shutting down the air monitor. So, and then, you know, over the years,
Well, before we go on to that, at that time, the Test America, which was in charge of monitoring the results at the Hunters Point shipyard and Treasure Island, Michael Mabry, who was the assurance manager to test the results, found that they had a computer pad and they were having false readings. They were having 100% negative readings.
Right.
As a result of the computer pad. He reported that this was statistically impossible.
Possible, right.
You can't have 100% negative readings on testing at Hunters Point, which has asbestos in these turpentine in the soil. So he reported that as well as another assurance manager at Test America. They were bullied and fired. His case was taken up by Daryl Whitman, who was an OSHA investigator and lawyer with the Whistleblower Protection Program, and he ruled in his favor. And then Daryl Whitman was fired, and now there's a group called United Whistleblowers, including Daryl Whitman and Michael Mabry and others. But here you have actually the company, Test America, which was in making the investigations about the toxins that were being released, being retaliated against for telling the truth. I mean, it seems like it from the get-go, there's an effort to cover this up. And he went to Nancy Pelosi's office, and actually he went to the U.S. attorney because he had gone to Nancy Pelosi, provided her with the documents. He went to the U.S. attorney. They didn't want to take his complaint that she should be investigated and prosecuted because she knew about that.
That's interesting. You know, you've talked to me about that before, but I just got the temporal connection. And that's why it's so important for us to revisit these issues on a regular basis. I, you know, like you, have been following the shipyard issues for over 20 years, but despite having a significant fund of knowledge that people often are impressed with, you know, the more I study old situations, there are neural net connections and there's information that, you know, I understand with great clarity for the first time. You know, we've talked about, you know, Amy Brownell's resilience, and I do believe, as I have mentioned to you in private, that there is likely a relationship between she and Nancy Pelosi that may be protective. That's the only explanation I have for someone who has been as thoroughly investigated, has had repeated complaints generated, including complaints, you know, to her licensing board, and she seems to be very, very resilient and to be able to stick no matter what.
I mean, she seems to be impervious. Even the Chronicle did a story about the fact that she was involved in steering people to these homes and telling them that they were safe. So you think after the Chronicle, major newspaper in the Bay Area, has a story about the fact that she was involved in helping to sell the condos, that would be something to take action around. Yet, and you have challenged her license for what she's doing. And what has been the response of state agencies when you did challenge her license?
Well, let's go back a bit. That article that identified the email correspondence that the Chronicle documented, they obtained it via a Freedom of Information Act. That article was on the front page, And there were members of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors who were quoted in that article as saying that they would take action. There appears to have been some action taken because Brownell ceased to be, the voice and the face of the San Francisco Department of Public Health. What the Department of Public Health did structurally was divide itself into two environmental divisions, and one of the divisions that's led by Patrick Fosdale is the environmental division that is over the federal Superfund site at the Hunters Point Shipyard. Is probably over the Treasure Island site also. The other issue, of course, that arose was the substantiation of the fraud around the use of the helicopter to detect radiation at the shipyard. And that was actually submitted as a Proposition 65 health and safety complaint to the state attorney general's office, simultaneous with a Prop 65 complaint that was filed by Charles Bonner on behalf of the Hilltop residents at Hunters Point who were being victimized by generation of dirt in the summer of 2020 during the global, COVID pandemic, shutdown. They were still excavating and generating soil at parcel A2. So, despite those complaints, she continues to persist at the Department of Public Health. And it is evidence first and foremost of the high level regulatory and government. And now we're detecting evidence of academic collusion in advancing the shipyard's development. The most recent developments around that University of California review, the 4 white male scientists who Mayor London Breed tapped via the chancellor's office to lead a review that effectively said that the gamma scanning of parcel A that was conducted by the California Department of Public Health was safe, and that the Navy's protocols for retesting were safe. There's now an abundant evidence base that documents the corruption of that UC-led investigation that was led by John Baum's MD, a pulmonologist, member of the California Air Resources Board, who was paid by Lennar in 2007 when he led a similar review when the shipyard was generating the toxic dust, going back, to what we were just talking about, Amy Brownell, 2007, 2009, the toxic dust exposures. They got a UC professor pulmonologist at San Francisco General Hospital to sign off on a letter with other health professionals, doctors, saying that people could tolerate asbestos and particulates and shut down concentrations. These were astronomical exceedances. I personally recall an exceedance that was 120,000 fibers per cubic centimeter. That's how high these exceedances were. And this letter that Baum's is a signatory to says that the residents and children, could be exposed to this toxic dust at this level for up to 7 years without expected health effects, and that no testing would be necessary. So, yeah, that's just the web that we're, dealing with. And, the good news is that with exposure, it appears to be crumbling, and certainly appears to be weakening.
And we're talking with Dr. Ahimsa Sumchai Porter, and she has been a longtime medical expert examining what is going on with the Hunters Point Shipyard in Treasure Island, and has been testing some of the workers. And when we talk about the University of California and the regents, we are also talking about a facility that they have at the shipyard where workers were getting contaminated and were not being told about the radioactive dangers, right next to a police training facility, the San Francisco Police,
Yes.
where also the police were getting sick. So
Right.
It seems like to have this academic veneer that everything is fine at the Hunters Point Shipyard by other physicians at the University of California really is criminal, really, because the physician should be responsible for protecting the health and safety of the workers and the community. And yet what you're saying is you have evidence now that there was a cover-up by University of California physician.
Yes, and yes, this does constitute medical negligence at the highest levels. And you are correct. No one refutes the fact that building 830, where the UCSF employees are housed, there are about 30 of them. It is a animal center. It is a animal area that was originally maintained by the scientists of the Naval Radiological Defense Laboratories up until about 1969, and UCSF acquired the building from the Navy at that time. In all fairness, the shipyard hadn't been fully characterized, but what was known at that time is that that building 830 rests within 25 feet of a industrial landfill that all by itself has an EPA federal Superfund designation. And landfills migrate laterally, and over the years, there is a very real likelihood that that landfill has migrated and is in even closer proximity to building 830. It may be directly under it, based on some of the reports that the workers have given me of detecting methane and petroleum products, in the environment. And then if you go east of building 830 on the radiation contaminated Parcel East shoreline, you get to building 606, where a cluster of police officers have worked in a crime lab that the department obtained at a very, very low cost through the city with assurances by the San Francisco Department of Public Health that it was safe. And there you have a cluster of diseases that are clearly environmentally linked and very suspicious circumstances. Animals who died, a police officer who went running and put his shoes in his locker and then, pulled them out and the soles had melted on the shoes, things that are very, very significant. Those officers, by the way, are represented by a very powerful attorney group. And I understand from talking to Attorney Charles Bonner, who leads the Hunters Point community lawsuit, that they are naming the Navy, as a defendant in their actions, and that's really a very, very powerful, blow for freedom. That the men in blue versus the men in blue. I mean, that's the big brawl fight you want to see. But yeah, I certainly don't mean to make light of the situation. In the Black Lives Matter era, it's difficult to, fully sympathize with the police. But when we launched the Hunters Point Community Biomonitoring Program in January 2019, one of the first things that I did was speak to the San Francisco Police Commission. I brought them a little test kit, and explained to them that the officers were extremely high risk, that the Department of Public Health had the ability to, at minimum, do lead testing. It was known there was lead in the water. They have hand washing protocols as lab workers they must adhere to. They've got to wash their hands, for over 20 seconds. And if you touch your mouth, that's lead in your mouth. So at minimum, they should have been tested for lead. But yes, I did offer them the opportunity to undergo the screening. And I recently sent another communication, offering them the opportunity to undergo the biomonitoring screening.
And part of the history of this struggle to protect the health and safety of the workers in the community is the situation of whistleblowers who put their jobs on the line, their lives on the line, to speak out about the falsification of testing and the dangers. And one of the things that we have to look at is that, in fact, Kamala Harris, who's now going to be the vice president and maybe soon the president of the United States, was district attorney in San Francisco and actually set up an environmental unit, environmental justice unit at the district attorney's office in San Francisco. What was she doing at the time that workers were saying that there were health and safety violations, and this was going on both at the time she was district attorney and then becoming California Attorney General around this issue, when you had the situation of the other companies that were being prosecuted by the federal government for falsifying tests, and Tetra Tech?
Yeah, well, I did meet with Senator Harris' staff in early 2019 after speaking to the police department commission. I did raise the issue of the police officers, because you'll also recall that there was that crime lab scandal that was going on when Harris was district attorney. So they are aware of the tool that we bring to helping determine in a more causative fashion the degree of chemical and toxic exposure these workers and residents are faced with. I am not sure that we can expect direct action from her, and in all diplomacy, it's obvious. It's been a matter of national press that she has a relationship with former Mayor Willie Brown, who is responsible for placing the police officers on the shipyard and is a executive with Lennar. So I think that puts her in a difficult situation. Where I do feel some optimism is with the position that State Attorney General Xavier Becerra is in now. He had been the focus of much of our lobbying. You and I talked early on about the need to have the State Attorney General's office involved, because we were dealing with state level actors. So the Attorney General just in the last year had received, communication from me, which his office responded to, via a representative, Casey Hallinan. I went to him about the malfeasance around the UC review, and I got a letter. I was really impressed. Within a week, I got a letter that seemed to affirm the credibility of my complaints and gave me a roadmap for who I should talk to. And then there were the complaints that were generated by Attorney Bonner. I generated a Prop 65 complaint on behalf of the workers in Building 830. And then there was the complaint that was generated around the Department of Public Health's role in that fraudulent helicopter scheme. So, Attorney General Becerra has been gifted with an enormous amount of credible evidence, documenting, this malfeasance and these very, very real risks that workers and residents are faced with during this unrelenting effort to, advance a system of federal Superfund sites. So he is going up to the White House, and he's going to be in a federal oversight position, the top federal oversight position, and I just can't believe that he would turn a blind eye to what he knows and has possession of, especially given a president who has lived with and has voiced his empathy for fence line communities and has voiced a commitment to the safety and restoring these communities, and in, again, a presidential administration that is going to be for the first time highlighting environmental health and justice issues. So I do feel good about any future role that our former Attorney General can play, especially now that he's in a position of direct oversight over a system of 3 federal Superfund sites at the Hunters Point Shipyard. I need to re-emphasize that over and over again. The Hunters Point Shipyard was designated federal Superfund site in 1989. The Parcel ET2 landfill was designated its own federal Superfund site. And in 2016, Yosemite Slough, which gets the runoff of the drainage from the shipyard's radiation contaminated South Basin, that was designated federal Superfund site in 2016, and you got people living within, a quarter to a mile of this system of 3 federal Superfund sites.
And the other issue, of course, is the state oversight, which should have been taking place and should be taking place over the Hunters Point Shipyard and Treasure Island. And we had a situation where there was a press conference, Attorney Bonner and others were, and you spoke at it, about the fact that Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, who was also the mayor of San Francisco when this very situation was developing, awarded Tetra Tech a $200 million contract to clean up the Camp Fire, despite the fact that Tetra Tech, the managers of Tetra Tech, had been convicted of falsifying information, and that they had fired whistleblowers who said that there wasn't a proper cleanup. So do you have any faith that Governor Newsom is going to make the state agencies do what they should be doing, which is proper oversight? Because I've interviewed people who've worked for these state agencies, and they say they don't even have the capability of doing this oversight work, even though they're being paid by the federal government to do this kind of oversight work.
Right. Well, the answer is no. Governor Newsom has an enormous amount of baggage that he brings to the issue, as well as potential culpability. So the best he can do is try to distance himself from the issue. The shipyard is enormously complicated by being driven by multiple layers of government. It is, for the most part, a federal property. There are agencies like the California Department of Public Health, the California Air Resources Board, the university that are involved at a state level. And then, your big driving force comes from the city and county of San Francisco and its Department of Public Health and its mayor's office. And in general, they tend to hang together, because there is a shared, culpability and potential liability. The Department of Public Health is clearly the entity within the city and county of San Francisco that faces the greatest amount of, potential recovery for medical negligence and failed oversight. And their position has been, essentially to say nothing. They really have been effectively incommunicado around both the shipyard and Treasure Island. Stanley Goff's, the attorney who represents the Treasure Island residents, they did name the Department of Public Health. So that's one of the reasons why the health department's strategy in recent months has been one of silence. But I personally have been deeply offended professionally by the position that the Department of Public Health has taken to shut out my very genuinely motivated efforts to educate them about, the findings of our biomonitoring screening. We're approaching 50 people we've screened, and I know that sounds like it's not a big population, but I attended in November the Scientific Guidance Panel for Biomonitoring California. And California Biomonitoring, in their presentation, they identified that a population of 50, if you're doing aggregate analysis, and remember, that's 50 people times 35 different elements that we can detect on one screening, that is statistically powerful enough to draw reasonable conclusions. And when we had screened 10 people, remember you were there, I was convinced we were onto something because we were seeing the same stuff, in the same group of people. So now we're out to a population that's approaching 50 people, 35 of the same elements. We got 16 people in that shipyard South Basin who all have 3 or 4 of the same 4 elements in toxic concentrations: arsenic, gadolinium, vanadium, and manganese. 4 of those people live in the same house, their family. We got 2 sisters in the same house, a quarter of a mile from the shipyard, with the same toxins in their urine, arsenic, vanadium, manganese, gadolinium. They've been there 20 years. There are just examples like that that are beyond statistical probability. You just can't write this stuff off as not being, an issue beyond, just statistical odds. So, and then of course, the most specific finding that we have, the most outstanding finding that we have, the finding that no one appears to be refuting me when I say it, is that we appear to be the first human biomonitoring program to ever screen and detect multiple radioactive elements in multiple screenings. We have people who have, 4, 6 elements that are known to be radioactive, that no one questions their radioactive potential: uranium, cesium, thallium, strontium, rubidium, vanadium. These are all elements with 1 or more radioisotopes. Even the manganese that we're detecting with a frequency 100% has about 19 gamma emitting radioisotopes. So this type of information, to bring it to health department and ask to meet with Grant Colfax, the director, Tomas Argon, the director of population health, and to not get a meeting, is astounding when you think about it. Grant Colfax was a leader in the AIDS movement. Imagine having 50 gay men with a new disease and just ignoring those findings.
Again, we're speaking with Dr. Ahimsa Sumchai Porter, and I was at a Labor Council meeting where there was a report by the EPA and the U.S. Navy to the San Francisco Labor Council. And I asked at that meeting of the Labor Council, had they done the testing of the residents and the workers in Hunters Point Shipyard as they were moving towards developing it? And I couldn't get an answer from the EPA or the Navy. So here they are developing this shipyard without testing the residents, the workers there, to see if they've been contaminated. And I also at the same time, I learned that the Lennar Corporation had given a $500,000 grant to the San Francisco Labor Council, apparently to get them on board for the development.
Yes.
So
Yes.
Here you have a situation where the Navy and the EPA come to the Labor Council and say that we should go ahead with this development without saying, what about the residents? What about the community? What about the workers who are there, to find out if they've been contaminated, so that you should not go forward with this development on a radioactive toxic dump. It seems like this is a sign of a conscious decision that they don't really care about these residents and workers, that they're going to be contaminated, they're going to die from these cancers and other diseases, and it's okay.
Yes, collateral damage. And that is affirmed by the the UC review, and the review that was undertaken that Dr. Baums was a part of in 2007. In 2007, when the toxic dust exposures were being generated by the grading of the serpentinite rock, that this the bedrock of the Hunters Point Hilltop and the shipyard, That letter that Dr. Baum signed on to again said that these residents could be exposed at these concentrations for 7 years and that no testing. They even said radiograph. They even said that x-rays wouldn't be necessary. And these were kids. The Board of Education had voted unanimously to shut it down by August of 2007. They had kids with pneumonias and asthma and nosebleeds and, you know, dozens of people testifying. So you had John Baums, Amy Brownell, Mitch Katz, Rajiv Bhatia, Steve Krutzer. These are the top doctors at the Department of Public Health and the California Department of Public Health, signing on to a letter that was being used, that was being referred to subsequently. And then they used the same strategy with the UC review in July of 2019 through this year, where they bring these high-level quote unquote white male scientists, that is what Dr. Baum's referred them as, to say that, yeah, it's okay, you know, you can just go ahead with the development, even though the Environmental Protection Agency was blocking the Navy because the EPA disagreed with the Navy standards for, you know, the radiation in soil because it was associated with a higher cancer risk. And again, it should be emphasized that this is the Trump EPA that is opposing the Navy and siding with community scientists and activists and attorneys, you know, on behalf of these soil standards that the Navy had adopted. And so, you know, London Breed, City and County of San Francisco, they did the same thing. They effectively stepped in on behalf of the Navy to advance the development, and they were successful as a result of the letter that these scientists signed. They went forward on the excavation of parcel A2, and that's why Attorney Bonner mobilized in June of 2020 because the residents of the Hilltop and the schools and you know, Boys and Girls Club were being directly impacted by these excavations of soil that were occurring at the height of a global pandemic.
It seems that actually that these developers have actually escalated the development in the pandemic because there's a lack of transparency in commissions, there's an inability to get information, that they've used this as a justification or excuse really to just proceed ahead regardless of the cost to the health and safety of the community. Do you feel that that's the case?
I do, and I feel that Governor Newsom deliberately or inadvertently gave them justification for doing that. The earliest openings that were announced by the governor after the full shutdown were to allow for outdoor construction. So, you know, they certainly ran for the ball. The other thing that they're looking at is the reality that the transparency of the shipyard's radiation history is going to foil developer efforts to site residential development at the shipyard in areas that, when I was on the RAB, you know, in 2000, 2005, we never would have imagined that they would try to build houses next to parcel E or parcel D. That parcel G square that they've cut out that they're trying to use to construct housing in is called the Shipyard South multi-use district. That was never part of the development plan. So I think that they're looking at the reality that the most residential development they're going to get out of the shipyard is in parcel A, and the development of parcel A2 was stalled because of, you know, all of the issues that have come to light. So that's why there was the force to get the development going on parcel A2, and some of it is out of desperation, but it's very, very dangerous.
What do you feel the community, labor, working people can do to help your efforts to get accountability, and particularly to hold these officials accountable, doctors and government officials who seem to feel that they don't have to have transparency, number one, and number two, that actually have colluded together to push forward this development, even over the cost of the lives of people and their health and safety of them and their families.
This needs to go to a national level. A public employee group that identified the shipyard as being the greatest case of eco-fraud in U.S. history. That is a national organization. There have been efforts clearly to censor and minimize its impact. If you look at what happened in Flint, Michigan, and I have reviewed the history of Flint, Michigan, because there are a lot of corollaries, except in Flint, Michigan, there was one data point. There was lead, and there was a doctor who was doing the same thing that I was doing, except she was just minding her own business. I went out to develop a human biomonitoring program, for the second time in 10 years. But she was just testing lead levels in her kids when she noticed they doubled. It took over a year to get a public health emergency declared by the governor in Flint, Michigan, despite an enormous body, of research and substantiation. But it did ultimately, go national, and there were government officials and professional lab workers who were criminally indicted or resigned or lost their jobs. At the Hunters Point shipyard, we have a community and workers in multiple clusters who all have similar toxins in their urine, and those toxins are documented by the EPA and the Navy to be in the soils and the media at the shipyard. And in my mind, this is an enormous event, and it will ultimately go national. I mentioned to you, I just wrote an article that hopefully will appear in the Gavel, which is the national publication of the Coalition of Concerned Legal Professionals. They offered that opportunity to give this a national platform. But when we do receive the focus that we deserve, things are going to change. And I think that we're on a collision course, given the priorities of the federal government, the changing impacts that we're seeing to public health and air quality as a result of the global pandemic, the increased population surveillance that we're seeing as a result of the global pandemic, the increased focus on health disparities in communities of color. And Baby Hunters Point, in my mind, is one of the highest risk communities in the nation. I just see it as ultimately happening. I'm just amazed that it's taking so long, and I'm amazed at the level of collusion that is occurring between really high-level actors on behalf of this corporate development interest at the expense of the health and safety of some of the most vulnerable people probably in this country.
I want to thank you very much for joining us on WorkWeek, Dr. Ahimsa Sumchai, and I think that your struggle, our struggle, working people's struggles to protect the health and safety of the community of workers is paramount. Our lives are at danger, and there are reasons we have the high asthma, the high illnesses, and the really health emergency going on here in Hunters Point, Bayview Shipyard, and Treasure Island. So I want to thank you for joining us on WorkWeek, and we want to continue to take up these issues and make this a national issue and get accountability, and also proper health care and benefits for the people in the community and the workers. So thanks for joining us on WorkWeek.
Okay, all right, bye-bye.